Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our hosts and our guests for today. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner, and I'm so pleased that you all continue on this journey of listening to all the voices on the show. Some, as you know, are survivors themselves. Some are working intensely alongside survivors in their healing journeys. We have authors, activists, experts, and today we are so excited. I can't wait to introduce you to Renee, our guest. But just remember, push pause anytime you need to do some self-care, take a breather, come back, visit us, visit the rest of the episode later, journal, take some fresh air in, whatever you need to do, good care for yourself on our episode. So welcome, Renee Rosecki. So tell us a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and your bio.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Renee Rosecki. I am a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm a psychotherapist by trade. I'm from New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. So I live in the New York, New Jersey, PA area, and worked all throughout that. And I will say this, a little like fangirl moment. I did take back the night when I was like a freshman in college. So when I got connected with this, I was like, oh my God. And a couple of my friends who are also therapists and like specialize in like domestic sexual violence, they were like, oh my God. I was like, oh my God. So I'm very excited to be here today, just as a side note.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Renee. And I love it because, you do this one thing. Some people only do one Take Back the Night. Some people have never heard of Take Back the Night still, but I feel like it's one of those indelible moments for so many of us. Like, it's like, wow, there's this public display of survivorship. And we all didn't know we existed until we kind of stand there with our candles or on the march and the walk. So it's pretty powerful. And definitely I like the physicality of it too. It's like really present, breathing, living the moment. So thank you for sharing that. So, and your work has been fantastic. I don't know, where it came from, but you said you grew up in the kind of the Jersey girl all the time. Where did you go to school, or, what was that like, kind of your first younger self?
Yeah. So I went to Rutgers for my bachelor's and my master's, and then I went to NYU for my doctorate. My first professional experience with sexual violence. So I worked in residence life. I was an RA in undergrad, and then I was a hall director in grad school. So I did 5 years of living on campus in the dorm.
Oh.
And I remember I was a junior, so I was still a student, right? I'm still a college kid. And I had first year like freshman residence. And one of my students came to me. She actually lived in the room next door. So as an RA, like you live on the floor with your students. So you get to know them very well. Like we have public showers. So like sometimes my students were talking to me about how do I sign up for classes? And like we're literally like in the shower stalls next to each other, right? So very much communal living when you live in freshman dorms. And, I got to know my students, especially like the girls, they would come to me kind of like as an older sister. And the one girl, she came to me, she was having issues with the boyfriend on and off for months. And then things got kind of escalated and she came to me and she reported domestic and sexual violence. So I had to report it up. And we went through the whole process of, she talked to the police. She didn't want to press charges. She didn't want to go to like a hospital or anything. But she ended up doing on-campus counseling. But that was like my first like professional experience. I wasn't a therapist yet. This is, like I said, I was 21 at the time, right? I was a student too. And that was probably like my first professional experience regarding sexual violence.
Wow. And that I think that's so interesting too, Renee, because I the first person I told was my RA, believe it or not. And I lived in an all female residence hall, and my RA was a guy. And I still think, regardless of the gender and the whole configuration, I do think I love the way you described it. There's this collective kind of unity that can exist. Even though you're older, you seem like older, and like you said, cool older sister kind of mentality. And I think it was like a cool older brother for me. So I'm imploring anyone who's listening to our podcast episode today to just really embrace kind of taking on those leadership roles. Like if you're even someone who's still in college right now, consider becoming, you might never know what's going to come your way, whether it be what Renee had to happen or people who have all kinds of issues, but you get kind of inspired that you can help people and you're only like 18, 19, 20 years old. So anyway, then what happens? So you're doing that for 5 years.
Yeah, so I was an RA for 2 years in undergrad, well, 3 years, my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And then in grad school, I was a hall director. So I actually oversaw like an apartment complex of all women.
Oh, wow.
There was 9 buildings. We had like hundreds of
Oh my
girls.
gosh.
And it was actually pretty striking to me because we had like the highest rates of domestic and sexual violence on campus because it was the all women's college at Rutgers. And I
Right.
will say, like, our medical staff, our counseling staff, our Rutgers like police department were amazing, but it's just unfortunate, right, that we just had the highest rates on campus. So I dealt with a lot of that. I had started working clinically at that point because I was in my master's at a methadone like substance use clinic. I was doing both of those two things at the same time while I was getting my master's. It was a little chaotic, and that's when I really got to start working clinically with survivors.
Hi, this is Katie Koestner, and I wanted to remind all of our listeners about the free National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline. We at Take Back the Night have assembled an incredible team of attorneys, trauma informed, who truly believe survivors and want to support their journeys in healing and finding justice. The Get Justice Hotline is 567 Shatter, or feel free to fill out a form on the Take Back the Night website, share your story, let the attorneys know what's going on, and they will get back to you as soon as possible with all of your legal options. That is a service we are delighted to provide through Take Back the Night. Okay. And so I guess when our listeners are kind of hearing, what does that look like to you? Like, what's a day in the life of Renee at that point? Are you seeing lots of people? I think sometimes we who are survivors, we might see our therapist once and we have no idea, how it feels or what they're, juggling all those cases. And like, how do you work through it all as a professional?
Yeah, so this was my first clinical job. And like I said, I mean, I went straight from my bachelor's to my master's. So I was in my early 20s. I really had wanted to work with children, actually. And the only clinical placement they found for me was at a methadone clinic. And I was like, okay. I ended up loving it. It ended up, like spearheading my career. But I was working like 20 hours a week for Res Life. I eventually got hired full time during my master's at the methadone clinic. And then I was also in a master's program. So I was kind of doing residence life, which is like programming, but crisis. So it's kind of both ends of the spectrum, right? You do like community programming and it's fun and door decorations and bulletin boards. And then you're doing, on campus crisis calls I was on duty for like 4,000 students, right? Going to the hospital and stuff at that point as a director. And then I would go to the methadone clinic and I would do one-on-one counseling with my clients. So my life was a kind of a piecemeal at that point.
Gotcha. And then tell us more, because now you've really specialized in, I think, survivors of sexual violence or abuse. Even I loved reading about your work with women in prison too. So how did you come to do that work specifically?
Yeah, I had been at the methadone clinic for a handful of years. So I graduated, I got my licensure, or I got my first license and I was working towards my second license. And I was looking just for, some variety. I had been only at one clinical job. I had a couple little part-time jobs. And I applied at the prison and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to work at a prison or not. I ended up working in 2 different prisons and a jail over the course of years. So I worked in carceral settings for a while, and the amount of histories of trauma and abuse and sexual violence with the women I worked with. I worked with men too, but the women was just outstanding. It was just like overwhelming. Like the amount of sexual violence they had histories of, and then also reoccurring in the prison system.
Oh no. And I guess one thing that terminology caught my attention was, what's the difference between a prison and a jail?
So usually, so jails are a year or less. That's really where you are, like for like more like misdemeanors, lower level crimes, or if you're awaiting to be sentenced. Prison, whether it's state or federal, is going to be a year or longer, and that's going to be more like felonies. The difference between
Okay.
state and federal is kind of like the jurisdiction you like committed your crime and were like charged in. So I worked
Okay.
in minimum,
Thank
medium,
you.
maximum, mostly a maximum over like the 5 years I worked in the carceral system.
Okay. And so, I mean, I guess for those of us who aren't so familiar with the women who end up there, the only knowledge I can bring to the table, Renee, is Tipper Gore, married to former Vice President Gore, when she was doing her kind of work and philanthropy, I went and did speak at a maximum women's prison in Connecticut. And I too, it was overwhelming, because some of the women's stories were things like they had lived on the street, and they killed their pimp, right? And they had already been raped and abused and grew up, surrounded by it. It was almost unfathomable how one might even see a way through all of that trauma. So I guess where I'd like us to go is, what does that look like to you, and what were some of the women's experiences, and how were you helping them navigate their trauma? And then when we get to that, through that, I'm hopeful women of all walks of life are able to access our podcast. But then I'd also like to think about what else you would say for our listeners, no matter where they are, that you learn that might be helpful to them. So first, let's kind of focus in on what sort of experiences and types of trauma, and then what kinds of things were helpful.
Yeah, yeah. When I was previously at the substance use methadone clinic, I really did like mental health and substance use counseling. I was trying to learn a little bit about trauma, and in my master's, they like touched on it. But really, like as a new therapist, you don't have a specialty, right? You go through your master's, you get your first job, and you're kind of building that. So by the time I got to the prison, I was getting really interested in trauma informed care because, like I said, most of my patients had just very extensive histories of, trauma, specifically sexual violence for the women. So I went to my supervisor and I was like, I want to start taking training. So I got trained in a couple of specific things, EMDR, cognitive processing therapy. I really started to go to a ton of trainings. And, one of my colleagues and I, we started a sexual violence survivors therapy group, actually. We started like a mindfulness group for like PTSD. And I started just getting very interested in trauma and realizing, wow, like what is the connection between, if you go through trauma, we can get really clinical with this, however deep you want to go, Katie. If you
Mm-hmm.
look at the impact of trauma and then kind of the connection to how people have maladaptive coping, dysregulation, and then how can that lead to criminal behavior, right? Like how much of
Mm.
this, like, and the one thing, if you get nothing else from this podcast, I worked years in corrections, substance use, shelters, all different places. And most people are good people. Like most people are good people. And most of my clients were like very like good to their soul, good people. Most of them had just been through horrific trauma. And that's like my main
Yeah.
message. I always try to like get out.
Thanks, Renee. I think that's very positive and hopeful. Hi, everybody. It's Katie Koestner. Just a quick interruption. We want you to know that there is an entire shop full of cool merch on the Take Back the Night website to support your own healing journey, that of someone you care about. There are t-shirts, there's bracelets, there's glow-in-the-dark stuff. There's all kinds of unique special edition from our artist series as well. So please take a look, if it's a holiday or a special occasion or just a gift to yourself. Support Take Back the Night through your purchase. I kind of want to go back to that powerful statement you also said, which was, it becomes so overwhelming, there's no way to navigate it other than some of these, you said, maladaptive, behavior. So how does that look to you? Or I guess I'm sure there's not one tipping point, right? Everyone's specific, but I guess can you go into that more in detail?
Yeah.
Because I would say like a way I'm thinking of it is as we've had all these guests, um, there's there's behaviors that might be maladaptive that wind you up in a prison, right, or a jail cell that are illegal. But there's also plenty of harmful self-harming or other ways to spin into a negative spiral, right? So that you might not get arrested for, or maybe aren't as noticed. So I guess that might be interesting to explore too. Is was there any commonality that was the added factor that the behavior that came from the trauma was criminal in nature?
Yeah, I think a lot of my clients, if I kind of had to think about it, a lot of my clients had histories of mental health, whether that was substance use, whether that was anxiety, depression. They had a lot of histories of trauma. I had clients who had master's degrees, and then I had clients who were homeless and in gangs. So I had people from all different walks of life, right? Trauma does not discriminate. So I had people who had just really been through a lot of different life circumstances. And I think substance use was a main reason. Substance use was a big part of my experience in, the carceral system working with people. A lot of times people will do a lot of things they normally would not, right? If they're under the influence or if they're going through withdrawals. I did work with people who, kind of like you were saying, were sex workers or prostitutes, any of the kind of areas, human trafficking. I worked with people who had a lot of different charges and a lot of different backgrounds. So I think kind of the overarching theme is trauma. And when you look at how that dysregulates people, it's not, oh, I'm a little anxious, so when I go to work, I'm kind of anxious. It's like, if I'm traumatized, I might be having flashbacks. I might be, trying to numb with substances. I might be trying to avoid people, places, or things, right? So your whole level of functioning just goes down significantly. And we just don't
Mm-hmm.
really understand this as like a culture and a society. Like our criminal legal system and just our society in general is like not trauma informed at all.
Right. I think that's well said too, actually, Renee. And I guess I'm also thinking about, I wish there were like stop gaps when we could start to see the slippery fall and someone to come in and not just say, you did this, therefore, but really say, you did this. Let's think about the whole system around this and what do we need to put in place in that time that you're, doing time, to help you find a different pathway. And what I hear you saying is that doesn't really seem to happen.
Yeah, I think our team was phenomenal. I actually worked with a really good group of different therapists, so psychologists, clinical social workers, counselors, psychiatrists. And our team did some really good work. I think in general, people look down at people who are incarcerated. People don't really understand like what led people to being, in prison or jail. But I think there was some really good hopeful moments. Like I can think of so many clients where we actually did some really good work on the trauma they had and how that really it enabled them to have like future hope and future plans to go back to school, to get their children back, to rejoin society and be able to like function again.
Yeah, that's excellent. So you had a team. Is that common, or was it pretty unique in your experience? Like, I don't know, how does every prison have an awesome team like you had?
It depends. When I was like at a county jail, like it was literally me as like a mental health like therapist and like one case management social worker, and that was our whole mental health staff. It was me and one other girl, right? Because we were a tiny county jail, but when I worked in the state prison system, like I was on treatment teams.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess what sort of, you said that you rattled off a whole bunch of modalities like EMDR and like you're like, I did all these, which was fantastic. I think we've done a couple sessions on EMDR. I'm not sure. Is there any other one that you could explain? I'm not sure how many. You said them like really fast. So, um, is there another one you could give our listeners some ideas about what it is?
Yeah, I'm
And
trained in a handful of different therapies. I will say EMDR is probably the one I use the most for trauma
oh,
specifically, and specifically like sexual violence. It's just so powerful because it has the psychodynamic, the cognitive, and the somatic piece, right? So it does the brain, the body, and feelings. It does everything. It's like all like packaged
mhm.
nice, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Is there another one you could talk with us about? Just maybe a second sister, a
Yeah,
cousin of that?
yeah, I'm trained in cognitive processing therapy. That one's good. I like it, but as the title, it's cognitive, so it doesn't always address adequately. I feel like the body kind of symptoms, which I feel like so much of trauma is based in the body. So I've done that with people, and they've found it helpful. I was trained in brain spotting. I've used that like minimally. It is a
What's brain
cousin.
spotting?
It's
Yeah,
like
what's
a
brain
cousin
spotting?
to EMDR. So instead of using bilateral stimulation, which is like side to side movement, which is what EMDR
Hmm.
uses, whether that's visual or tapping,
Hmm.
brain spotting is
Hmm.
kind of just finding a spot, like a one visual spot. I'm realizing the listeners can't see me. One visual spot where they can kind of use for processing in cognitively processing, and then that should go through the body, right, somatically. But it's just not as evidence based. There's just much less research on it than
Hmm.
EMDR, and I just find clients just connect with EMDR, and I just love EMDR.
Let me ask, another therapy I was like reading about is using temperature, like putting your feet or things on cold, really cold, like ice packs or like cold, snow or something. Is there any? I just saw something. I came across my plate, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." Have you learned much about like cold therapy?
Yeah, Marsha Linehan, she's the creator of dialectical behavioral therapy, so DBT. She developed it for borderline personality, which has a huge overlap with PTSD. Side note, so
Oh,
I have a whole bunch of theories on that. Oh, that's a whole other. We could go down that.
that's a whole podcast right there.
That is a whole podcast, but I think women undoubtedly are higher diagnosed with borderline. Women have higher rates of PTSD that are like undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So I have very complex theories on that. But anyway, she developed it. And one of the main regulation strategies she uses with people when they're having really intense emotions, they're getting overwhelmed, is, holding ice, running their wrist underwater. A lot of people with borderline will engage in self harm. So kind of having
Mhm.
that intense temperature difference can kind of help them, re-regulate, and then they won't act on the self-harm kind of
Oh,
impulses as
that's
much.
great.
Yeah.
I'm glad we talked about that because I
Yeah.
think anything that can help when you start to spiral or, feel completely like overwhelmed and out of control, I think is so important to just change it up almost entirely. Um, we can't all just like run outside and streak through the streets. I think it's a change of scenery or, I mean, those are things that I seem to hear from all my life of non-professional helping of survivors, just going around and speaking and hearing tons of stories. Sometimes we brainstorm or at Take Back the Nights, even Renee will run a workshop called From Hurt to Healing, and all kind of share what things are helping each of us. So I love this because you're the pro. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to take the journey on the Dear Survivor podcast. A quick note, we are 100% volunteer at the podcast and at Take Back the Night. Your donations, your generosity helps us do what we do on such a shoestring budget. And we would be so grateful if this show is helping you through your journey and you are passing it along to others you care about. Please visit the Take Back the Night website and donate and support our cause and our mission to end sexual violence and support survivors. Thank you. I don't know if you have another topic you wanted to talk about, but I think also, you also see people outside of the system, or are you working entirely within the prison system currently?
Yeah, so I was at the prison system for a while, and I loved my work at the prison, but then I actually got recruited. I served as a clinical director of a domestic and sexual violence agency. So in New Jersey, we have county agencies. So what we do in a super short nutshell, we do counseling, crisis, hotline, the safe house, the teams that go to hospitals and police stations for victims of domestic or sexual violence, outreach, and education. So that I oversaw a county DV agency, SV agency for 2 years. And then now I'm actually at the VA. I'm at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. So I'm the Assistant Women Veteran Program Manager for
Oh,
New Jersey. So the whole hospital system of the state. So I'm in
So
admin
you,
now. Yeah.
oh my goodness, but I feel like Renee, you're so fearless. You take on these really challenging, magnificent I'll say projects or categories of people who have such high I'll say like overwhelming amounts of trauma. Because if you're a veteran and you're a woman, no doubt, again, we know that women are so victimized within that system. There's so much harassment. So how, I guess, have you started doing contrasts and comparisons between, the veterans and the women in the prison? Or is there any connections you've made, or just unique and still different? Or
People are all the same. Trauma is trauma. I've worked with people like when I was at the methadone clinic, I worked with executives of companies that you've all heard of. And then I've worked with people who are homeless, and trauma is trauma, right? The way people experience it, especially sexual violence survivors, I feel crazy. Nobody believes me. I have trust issues. I'm scared of men. I'm scared of whatever. Like, that's consistent, whatever your race, socioeconomic, gender, like all of that stuff is consistent across the board and all the populations I've worked with.
wow. So I guess then maybe we head toward some of the things that you're working on, like projects, things that policies you're trying to implement, or, I don't know what's within your control, but what are you trying to like change within the different groups you've worked within, within either the New Jersey county agency or where you are now? Like, is there anything that you see systems that could use a little tweaking or are completely broken? And, you seem like really enthusiastic about making change and taking on hard projects. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think within my current role, so I work in women's health, and once again, very much like the prison system, actually, the prison system is a mostly male-dominated system, right? And then we have some women. So, and I worked in the healthcare side, and the same at the VA, right? It's mostly men, and then we have also our women vets. So part of my job now is making sure things are gender specific, right? So gender sensitive. Our women have the highest rates of military sexual trauma, right? So sexual violence they experience during their service. They have higher rates of sexual violence prior to their military experience than the general population does as well. And then combat trauma on top of that, right? So they really just have a lot of complex trauma. So one of the things I've actually got to spearhead, my supervisor was backed me up on this. I was pretty passionate about this. I told her, I was like, I really, I applied to work at the VA because this is where Bessel van der Kolk had done a bunch of his trauma research. And I was very excited about that. And I was like, I really think this is something we should roll out. So we've done for all of our primary care doctors, nurses, medical staff, medical residents, I actually spearheaded and implemented a trauma-informed care training for them. So it's just kind of projects like that, really making sure our staff is really kind of aware of certain things. Myself and our intimate partner violence coordinator, we trained all of the VA police on domestic and sexual violence. Just kind of different projects like that. I think just really providing extra education, extra, information on services that might not be at the forefront. Right. Like I think PTSD treatment is obviously at the forefront of the VA, but it's much more about combat treatment. And I think now in the past like 10, 20 years, the VA is really moving to have military sexual trauma treatment, intimate partner violence treatment, a little more kind of gender specific treatment because these things are more prevalent for women.
Yeah, definitely. Really important work. I'm thinking of anything else you want to share with our listeners about, just overall tips and personal strategies that they could take from this session today and, try later tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, I think one of the main things I explain to people, and especially my clients, and it seems to always make sense, when you look at interpersonal trauma versus other trauma, I don't know what to call it, non-interpersonal trauma. If you're in a car accident, if you go through a natural disaster, very traumatic, but it's not like a tornado intentionally hurt you, right? When you go through interpersonal trauma, we know that statistically most people know their perpetrators. And it's very different. So symptoms of PTSD that are not specific to interpersonal trauma. Like you might have nightmares, you might have flashbacks, you might have restless sleep, you might be kind of jumpy on edge, looking behind yourself, right? That can happen whether it's a car accident or a sexual assault. But when you go through something that's interpersonal, like a sexual assault, now I'm going to have issues potentially with relationships and safety and my self-esteem and my body image and different things, right? Sense of hygiene, all these things that if I was in a car accident probably wouldn't be affected. So I feel like my clients who have been through interpersonal trauma, specifically sexual violence, there's a whole set of symptoms that the DSM doesn't even touch, right? That a lot of therapists, that a lot of doctors don't even address or aren't even aware of. And my clients, they're like, I feel crazy. A lot of times they tell me I feel crazy, or they don't believe me, or I can't describe it. My memory of it's kind of hazy. And I hope, the one thing I hope to share with the listeners is that you're not crazy, right? These things are real. And to really seek providers, medical therapists, mental health providers that are really specialized in sexual violence, because it isn't just another trauma. It's not the same as everything else.
That's so helpful, I think, and really reassuring. And I'm appreciative, Renee, of you saying over and again, like a lot of survivors say, I feel crazy, or I feel all these, the lines are so similar. And I'm glad that you kind of joined everyone together. And, again, it kind of goes back to our opening statement about Take Back the Night being, this collective place where we can all share this common trauma experience and figure out together, we're not alone. It's so similar, even though our individual specific details of what happened can be massively different. The end result is still pretty connected. So my goodness, you gave us a lot to think about, I think. And also I'm feeling happy for our listeners, because they'll, I think, find this interview with you reassuring. And you were very positive in helping us, I think, say you've got this, everyone's going through it, and there's more, and you're optimistic too. I think you're saying there's more work being done, and you're part of that solution yourself. So I'm super grateful. And Renee, I think you are also going out there and sharing some speaking engagements, hopefully. And so hopefully our listeners will, if they're anywhere near where you're going to be giving a speech or being online again, they can come and meet you in person. So thank you so much for all your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, that's the other thing too. Like trauma is one of those things that you can heal from, right? It's not like diabetes where you have it for the rest of your life. Like trauma, I'm actually on the board of a nonprofit, Healing Tree, and the whole slogan is that, we focus on healing from trauma rather than coping with the symptoms. Like you can be in full remission. And I think that's like the really hopeful part. Same with substance use, right? There's a lot of hope. Like you don't have to be stuck in that. So I think that's, a good perspective to have.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for being on the show, Renee. And for all of our listeners, I hope, again, you'll continue to find each episode something different that you can take away. Continue if you're doing that journal where each episode you say, like, I got one thing out of this. What was it? Or I'm going to try this one thing. I'm going to try the icy cold therapy, or, the find one thing on the wall therapy. Whatever that looks like, it can't hurt to try, ever. You can try something that you never thought of, that it might all of a sudden be your new best solution. So continue the journey. Self-care is always important. And don't forget, if you feel like you need to reach out and find more resources, the Take Back the Night website has tons. If you want to get some justice going, we have the National Sexual Assault Victims Hotline for legal support. So call that. It is completely free to either call it or fill out the form on the website. So thank you for staying on the journey. Take care. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.